Hi, how are you today?
Hi, I'm doing well. How about you, Arnav?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for joining me and taking your time out to speak with me on this topic.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
So, do you want to start off by introducing yourself and telling the audience what you do?
So my name is Nasreen Meah. I am a psychotherapist. I have a practice in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I teach at the University of Michigan School of Social Work, as well as I run a nonprofit organization that focuses on helping so marginalized community in Bangladesh.
So, I've talked a lot about South Asian communities in future episodes and just all around in general. But do you want to clarify what is the South Asian community? Like, who is a part of the South Asian community and what makes them unique?
That's a good question, Arnav, because like you said, your whole podcast is dedicated to South Asian community, right? So who are South Asian communities? South Asian actually are about seven, it's some people say seven or eight countries that encompasses South Asian. So those countries are India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Maldives. So, and South Asian diaspora. What that means is that during the colonization, South Asians were pressured to migrate to different countries according to the need of the colonists to serve them, to fight for them. There are a few unique thing about South Asia is that, first of all, most of South Asian are migrated here following the Civil Rights Act. So most of the South Asian came here for higher education. So this is why there is such a high proportion of professional people from South Asian background. So because of South Asian coming from a professional field and from especially in a successful career, many of them are kind of I would say labeled as a model minority. Model minority is it's actually I don't remember exact year. I think in 60s there was a study about the success of South Asian, and based on that there was an article on New York Times about how successful Asian people are, and then passed down to South Asia now. So um, uh, and they kind of use this community as a model minority to pin them against Black Americans and kind of criticizing why they are having such a difficult time. So this is another kind of unfortunately a technique was used by majority to pin minority against another minority. But regardless of that, the model minority myth kind of keeps many South Asian from reaching out for help because they feel, oh, if I reach out, that means there is something wrong. So therefore, I am as fault, right? Or I am lack of. Going back to your question, what makes South Asian unique? There is also other thing in terms of racial trauma. Our racial trauma is very different than the Black racial trauma, right? Which is more kind of understanding. Whenever we talk about racial trauma, we think it's only Black American. Yes, of course we all know the history of how Black Americans or African Americans came to this country, the oppression and all this. But the racial trauma of South Asians are very different because they come from a very different culture background. I refer to collectivistic culture to come to this country, which is individualistic culture. That is a trauma where your mentality of, I am the product of my family's well-being, my family is well, I am well. It's a very different here is as everything is good as long as I'm good, right? So that's a big adjustment. I mentioned the cultural expectation, we talked about it. All this, an individual could internalize this, and that could be experienced as a perfectionism that is not unhealthy perfectionism. I want to emphasize difference between healthy perfectionism and unhealthy, because not all perfectionism is it's bad. So a little form of perfectionism actually is important for people to succeed. But when perfectionism become pathological means unachievable, that's when it becomes problematic.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I did not think about how much history is behind this too. I mean, the Civil Rights Act and all of this. I mean, I think you could have an entire podcast episode just talking about the history of the South Asian community. But I'm really glad that we clarified this and clarified what makes up the South Asian community because that's super important. I feel like that hasn't really been talked about much on this podcast yet. So, you have presented on suicidal ideation among South Asian Americans and how shame plays a really big role. So, do you mind explaining to the audience a little bit about what family shame means in South Asian communities and how it's different from maybe guilt or embarrassment?
So South Asian community comes from a collectivistic culture, right? And there's North America, it's called individualistic culture. So what that means is that individualistic culture is mean my wellness means others' wellness, right? If I'm happy, others are happy. On the other hand, South Asian community comes from collectivistic culture. What that means is that if others are happy, I'm happy as well, right? So it's our happiness depends on people, the loved ones around us. So now going back to you said shame, how's that plays a difference between the shame and embarrassment or guilt, right? Guilt is these are by the way, shame, embarrassment, guilt, these are all normal emotion. We all human being feels, right? All human being feel that. So the difference between guilt is that you did a mistake, you kind of like, oh shoot, I blew it, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of ends there. So I did this mistake and next time I'll do it differently. Or what have I learned from this, right? On the other hand, shame kind of goes in, I did this mistake, therefore I am wrong. Therefore, I lacking. I shamed. Therefore, I caused pain in my family, right? So you can see the difference between embarrassment or guilt is on the action that I did versus shame is me internalizing is I lack something. And this is why it's so painful for people to accept it. When I do a mistake, I not only I lack something, I also brought, because of our collectivistic thinking, I brought shame to the family.
And so, to my understanding, this collectivist culture is like a community almost, and the South Asian community, as we know, is very close and like tight knit, right? Everyone kind of knows everyone, like that kind of thing. Like you're living like it's like normal to like live with your parents like when you're older and stuff. So it's like it's a closer community. And so, is that why you think this becomes an issue?
There are multi factors contribute to that, right? There are also being a South Asian living in a country where they belong to a marginalized community, right? And there are also a lot of cultural stigma involved with that, right? Being a minority. South Asians are, unfortunately, there's a model minority myth, right? And South Asians are also mistaken sometimes, put into that high, in terms of expectation, that higher expectation among them. So all this pressure, living as a minority community, having to deal with the concept of model minority, right? And then all sorts of assumption that put on them. So it's all sorts of pressure coming from the society as a whole, as well as from the family, as well. All this plays a role in an individual, right? Making that struggling with that, the be at perfectionism and therefore not being able to meet that standard that they have in their mind, and then as a result, struggling with the shame.
I mean, yeah, that kind of brings me to my next question. In your work, you've explored how perfectionism shows up in the South Asian communities. So how does that pressure get passed down across generations, you think?
So one way that passes down is as children feels that pressure from the parents, they internalize that I have to, achieve certain level. So they internalize that as a person, they experience that as a perfectionism. 75% of the South Asian of the South Asian community are foreign born, right? So therefore, that mentality of, achieve more and all this, they hear from their parents, they internalize that, the children internalize that. And this is one of the way it passes down.
But why do you like what's like the root cause you think? Because I mean, like why in the South Asian community in particular is this like such a big issue?
What is a big issue?
The the push to succeed in like academics and stuff.
I think that goes back to like how we migrated to this country, right? The immigration system, it's a very selective, right? It is kind of discriminatory system, right? There is
Yeah.
a quota. So most of the South Asian in this country, unlike like common misconception of this country is that most of them refugee, but most of South Asian doesn't fit into this, right? Most of South Asian came or coming to this country to achieve higher education or in a professional level position, right? So as you can tell, so the background they're coming from a high performing, academically performing family. So therefore, they have that expectation on their kids. That is one thing. Another factor, being a marginalized community, we living in a marginalized community in this society, we know the only way to succeed is perform.
I want to get a little bit into your career at UMich. So you mentioned that you teach future social workers at University of Michigan about mental health, cultural competency as well, right? And so you're training, I believe, future therapists and social workers.
Mhm, mhm.
And so I think that puts you in a pretty unique position to see what's really missing from the education system in general, I guess. So, what does culturally competent care look like when a South Asian client walks into your office? And what should therapists know that the textbooks don't teach that you want to teach in your classes to the future social workers that you're working with?
So we actually like to use the term cultural humility than cultural competency.
Okay.
So the difference between cultural humility and cultural competency is that cultural competency almost sounds like you are competent, right? You know about certain culture, which is impossible. No one, now we are learning more that it's not possible for you to know a culture because cultural person is not just the product of the culture. Person is the product of their family dynamics, right? Their friend circles. So therefore, cultural humility is the proper word. Means I may have some idea about this culture, generic idea, but only this person could tell me, could teach me about who they are, how their psychological process, how their thinking process work.
I gotta
Does
start
that make
using
sense?
that word now, I think.
Yeah.
Cultural humility instead of competency. That makes sense. Yeah, competency, it seems a little bit more negative.
Yeah, and kind of like I know that I'm competent. You can never be a
Yeah.
competent, no matter how many degrees or how many years of experience you have. And cultural humility is about respecting an individual that who belongs to a certain culture. I think your original question was what should a professional know about an individual coming from South Asian culture, right?
Yeah.
So, having always continuing education in our field in health, mental health, is part of our ethical obligation. We should constantly educate ourselves. It's very important that we are talking about clinician professionals, right? I mentioned about practicing cultural humility. This is about something that a clinician who really want to practice cultural humility, these are the things that they can educate themselves about. And then, and practicing cultural humility, knowing that these are the fact, history, and then getting to know the individual, the client that you're seeing by from them, from their own experiences.
That makes sense. But, even the best therapist, they can't help anyone who doesn't walk through the door to get help, right? That's the most important first step. And so we've talked about this a little bit before, but you mentioned that you volunteered as a caseworker and then eventually served on the board of My Family Services.
Yeah.
To my understanding, that focuses on South Asian families' mental health and stopping family violence. So, from your time working with them, what do you think kept families from reaching out even when they knew something was wrong? Why didn't they step through that door to seek help?
There are multi factors plays a role. that some are specific to South Asian community, some are specific to any human being, because people who are struggling with domestic violence, regardless what culture you are from, it's really difficult to reach out, right? Because it's a very, very close personal struggle. Some of the factors that plays a role, a lot of shame, right? Shame around being the victim. Unfortunately, some people with the South Asian specific issues are immigration status, right? There are, unfortunately, now it's a rising issues, right? Fears about what if I reach out and then I get into trouble with my with the authority, right? My immigration status. So that's a South Asian specific issue, right? Shame is a generic issue. Everyone struggles with that, and with South Asian community, it's even worse, right? Because like in the beginning you mentioned, it is a very close community, just like any minority community, right? People talks. So shame multiplies when you are South Asian, right? To reaching out.
So I actually hadn't thought about the political basis behind why this is an issue, but that seems very relevant, especially today. And you're also from this community. You mentioned that you're from Bangladesh.
Mm-hmm.
And so as someone who has who is from South Asian background and also someone who is a mental health professional, how has your own cultural experiences shaped the way that you practice and teach this topic?
So that's a very good question. Actually, that's my struggle. I came to this. I'm a naturalized citizen. I came with my family after high school. I realized within the professional community the lack of understanding of my culture, cultural value, and that's what and the frustration how the professionals been, you know. Addressed not because of lack of understanding and respect and the cultural values and all this. This is what got me into landed me in this field, because I one of the question I remember thinking back then many now decades ago is that you know I am not the first South Asian here. Why am I having such a difficult time making the professional community understand my cultural values, and why am I having such a difficult time? The immigration trend in this country started with European American, but the immigration trend has changed now more than 2 decades now, right? But yet the professional community reluctant or lack of acceptance of other existence of other communities background, and so our education, our professional communities training is a very Eurocentric training, right? And that's one another factor, kind of going back, one of the question you had, what keeps people from reaching out? This is another factor that keeps people from reaching out, because professional lack of understanding, lack of practicing cultural humility.
And so the next thing I wanted to ask you is when you think about the next generation, the generation that you're teaching, um, what gives you hope that there is change that's happening?
What gives me hope is, fortunately or unfortunately, the current circumstances in the country, the political circumstances, that kind of shook up a lot of people, right? And a lot of minority realizing that, hey, we need to speak up, we need to fight for our right, right? And then also the majority people realizing that, wow, this is a real thing. A lot of people have, because human being naturally always want to do the best they could, right? Always want to help others. So there are a lot of conversation going on how this country's fabric is based on oppression, right? Unfortunately, this country established based on that, right? So a lot of people realizing that, majority, I'm talking about people with the majority background, realizing that, hey, actually there are certain things that are based on oppression. Maybe we are also playing a role in it. I, as I am teaching, we integrate cultural humility. We practicing as the practicing cultural humility as a clinician. These are the people who are going to be the leaders in the future. These are the people who are going to be politicians, who are going to be psychotherapists, who are going to be policymaker, who are going to be leader of an organization.
And that's so important to teach future generations about this and to encourage them to pursue something different than what their parents want them to do, right?
Definitely. Exactly.
And so now, before we wrap this up, if there was one thing that you would want families to understand about the connection between shame, perfection, and mental health crisis in the South Asian youth, like everything that we've talked about today, what would that be?
Oh God, there's one thing. Um, one thing I think the most important thing that parents understanding that um, mental health is a part of holistic care, right? There is nothing shame of reaching out to professionals that are trained to handle that. So knowing that you are not alone. I use the analogy of if you're bleeding, you can't stop the bleeding. Would you just tell yourself, I'm going to toughen up, or would you go to a doctor and address that? Same exact thing. Just, you interviewed a few people in the past about the primary care physician, right? Go to your pediatrician, go to your primary care physician if you're struggling with something, anything, address that. And they know they can refer you to the appropriate help that you need. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's so important to reach out to your primary care doctors because they're the ones that you see most, right? You're not going to be seeing any other doctor as frequently as you do see your primary care. You see them like every year for your physical and all that. And so they are in the best position to give you the help that you need at the time for the time being, right?
Yeah, that also know that now that thanks to insurance company actually allows you to also reach out to mental health professional individually. You don't have to go through your primary care physician. Know that as well, right? Fortunately, most of the healthcare insurance actually covers your mental health care as well
Wow.
as your health care, so which is great, right? For those people who doesn't have insurance, good thing is there are agencies exist such as My Family Services. They offer free treatment, right? And there are many other agencies within community that you could go through it.
I mean, that's great to hear that there are lots of resources for
Mhm.
people who are not able to afford treatment in that way.
Exactly.
Well, I think we had a great conversation. I really enjoyed speaking with you today, and have a great rest of
Awesome.
your day.
Thank you. You too.